Pseudo happy Saturday, Raven and lurkers and everyone and Rage and Pseudo and how's everyone doing? Hey, Pookie.
Been busy. It's been a busy week.
That was a prootin' sound of some kind. So how are the audio levels? I tweaked and touched things and I want to make sure they're okay. How do they sound, Pookie? How do they sound, Raven? Can you hear everyone?
Do we sound like we're about the same volume?
Hopefully.
As we should be.
I saw the bot's message pop up and I was like, do we sound right? No. It was the bot. Sounds good. Hey, we can actually set things up. Awesome.
Oh, and there totally was no Discord notification. That's why you didn't see it. Here, we're live.
Oh, hold on.
Technical issue time.
There, I just didn't hit enter. That's what happened. I had it all ready to go. I just
didn't actually press the enter key.
There's so many buttons to press before you go live. They're over here, they're over there, they do this, they do that. This is a complicated setup now. It's not like when I just started and went, let's see what happens when I go live streaming. Hey, I'm playing a video game. Yeah, it's way more complicated than that now.
For better or for... Ooh, that made me look way worse. Worse.
For better or for way worse? All right. So, how's your day, Raven? How's your day, Pookie? Everyone else says you're coming on in. How's your Saturday so far? It's goddamn gorgeous. Gorgeous in Vancouver. I'm in shorts.
I should wear shorts.
Praise the R1.
Hey, it's Mole.
3-month mole streak, and it says 2 months. It always is 1 month back. I'm going to have to add one to...
Month start at 0.
Yeah, apparently they're doing their numbering starting at 0 for the months. I might need to add one to that variable programmatically in place. I'll see if it'll let me do a +1 on the insert of the value. However, I kind of like that there's little issues with this mix-it-up bot where I like everything else because it pushes us to finish Rage Pod.
Us, a.k.a. Rage, needs to finish hooking it up to the damn UI already.
That darn enter key, his chair is okay, though. Hey, Rubido, how's it going, buddy? All right. Mole's here, Rubido's here, Raven's here, Lurkers are here, Pookie's here. More importantly, Rage and Pseudo are here. Can't do the show without them. We can, but we don't like to. We do once.
We will unfortunately have to. Coming up.
Hi. My beard is coming in nice and thick right now. I'm liking it. It's looking pretty solid.
I've just been turning into like some sort of wild caveman.
I've done that before.
Need to clean this up and get some sort of do something with it. But I've just been, I guess, living like a caveman. So I mean, it fits. I don't leave the house, so this is just my cave.
Yeah,
hermit life, hermit beard.
I did that before. I can't remember. I was just like, I'm not going to stop shaving entirely right now, and it grew like a fuzzy wuzzy beard. Like my face just went like this.
It was. I have one of those like electric trimmers, and I lost the charger, or it's just somewhere, and I'm like, I could either look for it or I could just let it grow, and I'm like, it's easier just to grow it out for the time being, at least.
I'm very, very happy that shave it manually was never even considered an option.
I'm too lazy to look for a charger. I'm gonna be way too lazy to break out the razor.
You're looking like a 70s buddy cop show right now. Nothing wrong with that. I like 70s buddy cop shows.
I actually miss the ritual of shaving. I actually like the ritual of shaving. It's just that, like, shaving a round thing is real tough, and I'm not shaving the beard.
Honestly, I'd figure shaving the round sloped surface would be easier than all the little lines and cracks and crevices around the chin and the little knobs and stuff you got to get around the face. Is a complicated thing to shave.
Not when you're using a safety razor. the rounded surface becomes much more difficult than the relatively flat surface.
Lurk, so I apologize in advance. Rage and Pseudo, hello. You don't need to apologize. You're here.
Hello.
That's all you need to do is be here, and we're totally happy that you're here. Always happy. So, we like to open this up, always, with a little bit of interaction before we just sit here and talk and talk and talk and talk. So does any of you have any examples of your favorite AAA games where they did something risque? We're going to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on this game. It might work. That doesn't happen often. I mean, a risque AAA game would be quite a risk.
It's true.
We can start off by just going over some like we can, I guess, define like what it is a risk in video game development. And
Well, Let's start with a real quick review, just in case people weren't here for it, on what AAA is.
yeah.
Both. Anything. Any risk. Anything where they're putting millions and millions of dollars into a game and they don't know. They don't know. So AAA is that top budget mark. So to put it into perspective, EverQuest, not a AAA game. Final Fantasy VIII came out the same time as it. That was a AAA game. Final Fantasy VIII actually had over 5 times the budget of EverQuest.
Spent it on very different things. Very different.
EverQuest was a massive game. To think of that game as having a fifth the budget of Final Fantasy VIII, a single-player PlayStation game, that one kind of opened my eyes. I was like, EverQuest was a risky game, and I looked into its budget, and I was like, oh, shit!
Not actually that big of a risk.
That was amazing, yeah. So we're looking in those top-tier games. Those top-tier games.
You'll typically find it with those like first-party publishers and stuff like that, and typically companies that are very large, could even be like publicly traded, have large investor pools, stuff like that.
So, good example of recent AAA, Cyberpunk. There's a AAA title for you. Was it risky? It was terrible, but was it risky?
For them, yeah.
I would say it would. It was wishky.
Wishky.
They definitely need a whisky after.
I don't know. It looked like their testers were on the whisky most of that time.
All 3 of them?
all the maybe half a dozen testers.
It's a good example of like, it may not always seem like an obvious risk, but for a studio that, was making like third-person RPGs, and then now they're going to kind of try to make something new to them, or something they're not, common with, and they're going to be competing with other studios with high budgets doing it, that is quite a risk, and this is kind of unfortunate example of how that can fail pretty hard.
Yeah, and it's something that we like to talk about a lot that really bit Cyberpunk is scoping. They tried to do too much. The risk that they took was trying to do everything.
Yeah, we talk about scope all the time on this show for very good reasons. Because scope is the number one thing to ruin a good video game. You try to do more than you can, and it's never going to come out good. It's not, and you see it all the time. Not just in indie games. You see it all the time in AAA games going, we're going to do everything! No, you're not.
Or you could technically do everything, but you're not going to do it well.
Yes.
To address Board's comment, Amazon Games, that counts as a risk. I mean, they're putting quite a bit of money into that, and I think their first 2 titles have failed and have already been basically canceled. I don't think they ever made it out of beta, and then their third game, which I can't never remember the name of it. They're supposed to come out later this year, and it's kind of the, are they going to go 0 for 3, or is this one going to be a success? I think is it New World or Old World? I think it's an MMO that they're making, which, I mean, is a risk in its own, let alone now that the first couple of games have done it, so we'll see how that goes.
Problem was he set it up to be a very original, never be done before walking. Yeah, I mean, Kojima, I don't know how much risk Death Stranding was. It was very much a Kojima game.
Yeah, I think with specifically Death Stranding, because it is Kojima, because we know Kojima's personality, because he is such a brand in the gaming industry, I would actually say that Death Stranding wasn't that much of a risk.
No, I would agree with that.
I'd say that it's still a risk. It's not a risk for Kojima, but it's a risk for Sony and a risk for where a lot of the money comes from. I think it had $100 million budget.
As soon as you put Kojima's name on it, though, that budget is justified. I mean, I'm not a big Kojima fan. But
yeah, a lot of people were like, Sony apparently was pretty disappointed with it. Apparently, I mean, it's still sold well and did well, but I think it like the image, right? It's not just always sales too. It's company image. And they took a lot of flack over, trying something this new, which is, what Kojima does. And there's a lot of good things for that. But I don't think they, kind of appreciated what the game was or what their money went to. And that kind of, that's a risk there. We'd probably be saying something differently if it wasn't as a success. People were really worried at first that it was going to bomb. There was a lot of really weird mechanics, especially with like the multiplayer stuff. Like, are people really going to bother helping each other out? Is there really going to be a system for that? What happens if, the player base dies a week into the game? All of a sudden that whole mechanic, the whole kind of intertwined internet thing just dies out, and it's kind of supposed to be like a major part of the game.
Yeah, No Man's Sky I would include in the risk if it was AAA. But it wasn't.
Because like that, it was just an insane scope. There was no way that they could finish what they promised in that amount of time. And they didn't.
Yeah.
They eventually got there, but it wasn't done when they released it.
Actually enjoying the game now. I've finally picked it up and started playing it, and I've got a little base built, and I quite enjoy my little base. It worked out very well. I really like their terrain manipulation system. Is Prototype a AAA? Bully wasn't.
Was Bully though?
It was Rockstar.
I know it was Rockstar, but I don't think it was a big budget production. It wasn't even marketed that heavily.
It really wasn't marketed at all.
Yeah, I don't think they had a huge. And I wanted to touch on the Amazon question real quick after Pseudo did, because I don't know if I'd even consider them a AAA game developer yet. It's just a market chance rather than a game chance at that point. They're trying to buy their way into a market, and it's always going to be a risky. There's no way to get yourself into the market safely. Period. You spend money until it takes off, and you hope it works, which is exactly what Epic's doing.
I was just gonna say, sometimes you piss off a lot of people along the way, because this is literally exactly what Epic is trying to do. They're trying to break Steam's stranglehold on PC gaming. Because like, oh yeah, Origin exists. Well, yeah, sure, technically it does. How much product do they actually move? Everything goes through Steam.
I mean, I'm working on the Origin replacement, and even I'm going, Origin's kind of used.
Yeah, well. The unfortunate thing too with like they're taking a huge risk over. It's not directly, I guess, game, but at least with their store, because they're pumping a lot of money into it, and it seems to be working because their revenue for the year that they did it was over their expectations. The thing that a lot of people are, or at least the concerns for a lot of people are coming from, is that they're not really doing much to, of course, build up the platform better with that money or build a community, which is, I think, a lot of people overlook to why Steam is so popular. It's not so much because it's what their games are. It's because Steam put a lot of effort into, community tools. There's a lot of stuff that you can actually do group wise, and they have their own multiplayer API. They have stuff for infrastructure around servers. They have a lot of stuff that, keeps people together and keeps people there, not just to get their games. And I think that's where the kind of like, we'll talk about the risk too, for our example of some companies are taking, which are the timed exclusive deals, which we see a lot now with the Epic Store, where they take a lot of money, that's going to help with their game and all, but it's a risk against, fan backlash, especially because there's a few examples where the game was already on Steam, and I think it may have already been up for pre-orders on Steam, and then all of a sudden they, took it off, and that's, you can see why the fans get pretty pissed off, especially for people who don't want to have to install, every single, have like 5 DRMs on their machine just to be able to play the games that they want, and have them just compete on, which ones they prefer. So there's a risk that way too, which is not even just related to the game itself, but just to the way the game is delivered.
Yeah, and it's a tough place, because like Pseudo said, like, you can really piss off a lot of your consumers by by taking that sort of strategy. But at the same time, if that's the only way that you can finish your game,
Yeah. I wanted to touch real quick on more a definition of AAA would help. I did kind of define it earlier, and we've done a panel about it before. AAA is defined by budget.
yeah, it is literally only budget. That is the only thing that matters when defining whether a game is AAA or not.
Yeah, so we're talking the biggest, grandest, most expensive games that they spend all the money on, and then went and did something where you don't know if that's going to work. FF15 wasn't a risk, it was just a pile of poop.
Fallout 76 was a huge risk as well. That's another example of a big risk that failed pretty bad. Not so much, maybe not a technical. Actually, it was a big risk in a technical sense because they tried to slam or jam an MMO engine into a single player engine, as well as the risk with their brand and their customer loyalty when they're like, oh, we're making mistakes here. Should we refund? It's like, nope, let's not. Let's double down.
Is that being risky though, or is that just being Bethesda?
Bethesda is very risky.
It's not like they ever changed their process or approach. All of their games are still done the same way. And how expensive really was it to just tack on the multiplayer? I mean, it's a stupid idea, but it's cheaper and cutting costs than developing a proper multiplayer engine to build their game on. So,
not really. It turned out to be very expensive because of the fallback from it, right? Like if they built it from scratch properly the first time and actually made, let's say, Fallout 4 but multiplayer, that would have been huge. There's millions of people out there that would have absolutely loved that. But instead of putting in the time and the effort to do it right, they took a risk and said, hey, let's take our existing code and shoehorn in a bunch of shit and hope it works. And then turns out it doesn't. So that risk failed. Bethesda is a really weird example of taking a lot of risks that tend to not go over well. Another one, of course, is
selling their games like hotcakes anyway. Why? Why are you buying these?
You see, first ones to try to do paid mods, which I do think that there should be a market for paid mods. I'd love to find that middle ground where publishers and developers can kind of loosen their restraints on IPs and let modders actually make some money and be able to put a lot of effort in rather than having it be a hobby. But at the same time, charging $10 for like a dagger in a single player game is just ridiculous.
Yeah, especially when the dagger is mostly a model and the stats are fairly irrelevant. It becomes completely worth it. But the reason I don't see it as a huge risk is because from the game design stance, Fallout 76, as soon as they say, hey, it's going to be Fallout with multiplayer, I know it's going to succeed. That's not a risk.
Mm-hmm. It's going to sell.
It's going to work. Now, they fucked it up. But that's not the risk. That's them fucking it up.
There's many risks to it, right? It's not just single risks. There's many decisions that have to be made, and it's not like it'll be one single risk they have to take. Especially when you get into AAA, there's going to be many risks that companies take that we can go over as well. Things.
Well, at that point, every AAA title is a risk, every single one. But I want to look at actually like doing something risky, taking Fallout and making it multiplayer isn't risky.
I'd say it is. Look what happened. Do you think it was good?
No. They fucked up something that shouldn't have been risky. They fucked up something that should have worked, basically.
That's sort of what Deus is trying to say. If they had done it properly, it would have been amazing.
Yeah, I think at that point, the idea is if you abstract something to that level, then everything is a risk and nothing is a risk, because if you do everything right, then there's no chance of failure. So that's my point.
No, that's not true. You could make it all right, but take a new approach to the genre, and people just don't like that approach to the genre and turn away from it. Even though the whole game is made right, you tried something different, and it just wasn't popular. People didn't like it.
Yeah, which is still a risk with Fallout being multiplayer. It wasn't done right, and we still don't know if that would actually turn out to be fun. Like I said, it's a single player game, when they can't do VATS. They can't do the same kind of story. They can't do a lot of things that a single player experience that people really enjoy for this series does. It doesn't always translate well into an MMO. So it's, there is a risk in saying, hey, let's translate a single player game into a multiplayer medium. It's not, we can of course say, oh, everyone wants it, so it'd be easy, but there's lots of games that everyone wants, and we could, at a design standpoint, say it should be made. But actual implementation is the actual bread and butter of things, right? We can come up with a million game ideas that would be awesome and put everything in like Cyberpunk, on paper. The design is awesome, cool, it's going to be great. It comes down to implementation, and implementation is where the risk actually, gets envisioned and developed, and, the outcome of it happens.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There's, I think, something to be said for the market analysis side of it as well, though. Like I agree with you now. The way that they've gone, okay, well, we need to, adapt this known thing to a new genre. That is definitely a risk, but from a market analysis side, like, it's multiplayer Fallout. It's gonna sell.
It would market itself almost. The hype was there.
Yeah, exactly.
They definitely knew. Yeah.
Whereas let's talk about the example in chat right now, because I do think that is a good example, which is RE4 and then RE7. RE4 was a drastic divergence from RE3. Drastic, like almost not even the same game. And then RE7 flips the whole genre on its head again, or the whole series on its head again, and just completely changes the series. They kept the core of it, which is nice. They kept the spooky and problem-solving puzzles to advance, and so the core of it is there, but doing away with zombies for mold monsters and changing to a first-person view, I mean, these were... When you've got a series 6, 7, 8 games long already, 6 games in the main chain, and then you change your genre. That's bold, especially when you're coming to the manager going, hey, we want to take this massive budget for the next big blockbuster game in our series and do it completely different than anything we've ever done before.
Something Final Fantasy.
Can you share the doc? I can put up some notes and stuff we can go over and kind of cover.
It is shared, but I forgot to do the final
it's a really good example of like risks. Like there's many different risks that companies can take, and we can kind of go over like, what happens with the AAA studios, and kind of they find their formula and they don't really expand from their formula. And the current state that we've been seeing recently is that the AAA titles the AAA studios are kind of pushing out the same titles over and over again, and any risks they do take are the ones that, they're not kind of being the first ones to do it. It's kind of what every other AAA studio is doing. They're now adopting it as well. An example would be, Battle Royale. So like some games, some AAA games find a success in it, and now almost every AAA studio with their game is like, hey, how do we shoehorn Battle Royale into it? We need Battle Royale and Battlefield. We need Battle Royale and Call of Duty. We need Battle Royale and Halo. We need it, it's now that they adjust their formula. This is their money-making formula. Not always the ones to kind of take the risk. And what we kind of see is that the risk-taking is usually left to indie and AA developers, because that's the only way they can really compete with the AAA budgets. They can't compete on tech. They can't compete with, quality always of, the actual assets, or even like animations, or even just like the writing is really hard to compete sometimes with, those size of budgets, but they can compete with taking risks and doing things that no one else has done, using that to kind of stand out from the market, because the market is pretty saturated. And then what we kind of see is when a AA game or indie game takes off and does well with some new cool idea, the AAA studios then take that, package that in their formula without having to, take the risk themselves. They let the smaller companies, do that first, and then they have, as Rage was saying, market analysis. They can go to their investors, they can go to their executives and say, hey, look, we see that Battle Royale with, microtransactions is making this much money, and this is the model they use, and this is how we can use the model in our game, and this is how we'll make the money too. And they go, okay, cool, here's the budget, there you go.
Yeah, that's the risk minimization, and that's why there's less risk. That's why I wanted to talk about this, because once in a while they really do things out there. I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy a lot later, but I'll touch on your 7R and why it's not a risk, and that's because it doesn't change the genre. Because Final Fantasy is no longer a turn-based game. Now, if Final Fantasy 15 was still turn-based menu combat like the classic 6 and 7, then I would say 7R is a risk. But 7R is no different than 12 and 15. They've done this before. It's an accepted standard within the Final Fantasy world. I don't like it, but it's already got a market. It's already got an audience. You know it's going to sell. They're not doing more than 5 to 10% new.
With 7R specifically, because it is a pre-existing game that they're remaking, I would say that there is some risk there. Not necessarily a ton of risk, but some risk.
I'd say using the Final Fantasy VII name on the new genre reduces the risk of the new genre.
It reduces the risk of sales for that particular game. But because they're changing what they had already cemented as one of the most popular video games of all time, and if they just put new graphics on it, everybody who liked the original would have bought it.
Oh yeah.
Then they've now changed what that game was. They've changed it to something new, and in doing so have alienated a good chunk of the people who loved the original, myself included. I won't be buying Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yeah, me either.
But like there is some risk there. Having the FF7 name on it means it will sell, guaranteed. That is a huge risk reduction measure. But at the same time, you do alienate the old fans.
Well, there's an interesting consideration here, too, because tacking on the Final Fantasy VII name, yes, we guarantee a number of sales, but do we also increase the expectation of sales? Is it a higher target to call it a success at that point?
Absolutely. I strongly disagree with that statement, Rubido. Nintendo is the only AAA developer that is innovating.
Yeah,
Yep,
they've been
still
responsible
innovate.
for most of the innovation over the last 10 to 20 years as well. Especially, they take a lot of risks too. It's kind of like their model they've had for a long time. They're very risk heavy, but they're also very cemented in the classical ways of development. So they're very cash heavy from their dominant monopoly in the 80s and 90s. So they can kind of do this, but they still want to make sure they're not losing money because it's not a good look. But if you look at the Wii, if you look at the DS, look at most of their handholds, it's always something completely new. And usually when you first hear about those things, you're like, what? When I remember when the Wii got announced and it's just like a remote, everyone's like, wait, we're going to be playing games with a TV remote, and everyone thinks about playing games when you're taking a flight or something. All you have is a little remote, or you couldn't really think about it too much, right? Because it hadn't been done yet. And then when it launched, a lot of those games still weren't great. There's a lot of risks in, trying to figure out what actually works with motion controls. But then they found out, hey, games that are simulations or games that are kind of sport related are huge. Bowling, golf, tennis, they're kind of, that stuff took off. There's a few other things that were but there's just some potential with kind of, the games that had swords or those kind of mechanics, but huge risk on their part. And then same with the Wii U, where they're like, let's just make the main thing a tablet that's just god awful to kind of use. That thing bombed, even though the Wii was super successful. The Wii U bombed, and then they go to the Switch and say, hey, let's do what we did before, but now try to do both home and mobile. They're, I'd say, very innovative. Their games can kind of be fairly traditional, but I think it's just kind of their code of conduct of we keep our first party games with expectations, we keep them kind of what we want to do, but we innovate in a hardware sense to allow other developers to kind of take those implementation risks.
And that innovation in some ways is a lot more risky, but also does drive the industry forward. We saw the Wii introduce motion control, introduce motion tracking, and then every other console tacked it on.
Yep. They took the risk, and then well, now we've got PS Move, we've got Kinect.
Yep. But Nintendo was absolutely the risk taker with the Wii there. And the Wii was a huge risk. And that's why I want to talk about this, Mole. So you're saying well, unless they change the genre, there are ways to take risks. But AAA companies are extremely risk adverse. Extremely risk adverse. They hate taking risks, usually. So typically the biggest, most expensive games of an era are the safest games of an era. because they need them to sell when they invest that much money. So it's nice to call out these times where somebody went, you know what, I have a great idea and I'm going to run with it and we're going to put all this money into it because I think it's going to be great. It's not always great, but it's cool when they do that. Virtua Boy?
Oh man. Such a cool project, executed so poorly.
I rented one and loved the shit out of it for that whole weekend. My eyes hate me to this day for it.
Probably literally the reason why you have to wear glasses.
There's a homebrew scene for it, and they're actually really cool. I have a buddy who has one, and a dev kit for it, so you can load on those games, and it's super cool. Super cool that people are still developing for it. Really hard on the eyes. It really hurts.
Yeah. The Wii U was a risk, actually, I'd say more because it went back towards a more traditional console with the Wii name. And it just, with the screen was a cool idea, but there was just no great implementations. I saw one really good implementation of it, and that was it. And that was in the Zombie U game, where when you open a container in the game, the container opens on the screen, and you have to move things from your bag, or from the container to your bag, and the bag to your container on the screen on your controller, but the game doesn't pause, and there still could be zombies roaming around and stuff. So you've got to keep an eye on the screen, but also manage your inventory. So it did this way, and I thought that was really creative. I loved that idea.
Bunch of really cool ideas with the Wii U gamepad as well, just for asynchronous multiplayer, like having one player be the dungeon master, if you will, in a game that you can play couch co-op with other players, and they're all playing on the main screen and you're controlling everything from the tablet. Like there's lots of really cool applications for this technology. It's just, it was hard to develop for, and you weren't guaranteed sales like releasing a typical game, so people didn't do it.
Yeah, and then to address most comment, the second screen is a huge risk. Like, yeah, it hadn't been done. Does it even really make sense? When you go to pitch that, it's like, it hasn't been done. How are you going to tell them we're going to make money? Well, now we have to, take all of our existing games and translate them to this new 2-screen media, which no one's developed before too, right? It's brand new risk for all developers. Are developers going to want to do it? Are they going to be excited to? Is it going to be, something that's easy to do? And you can see that a lot of games would get ported, they just wouldn't use the bottom screen. And then you're like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose. Now we have, 50% of the screen hardware not being used. That's a huge cost added to the thing if we just made it, a single screen. And then they made it a touch screen, and then they kept doing it more with the 3DS, which I don't think I ever actually used the 3D feature because it, at least for me, never really worked too well or was never implemented in a game mechanic. But these are definitely risks because there's research and development has to go into it. That's very expensive.
Yes.
I can say why it's usually why the AAA studios don't have, like I said, the appetite for the risk, or why they're kind of risk averse. And it's typically because they're large. It's a lot of money, and it's not always their money. And even if it is their money, they can't just be, throwing out their money and not expecting it to get back. And if you're using this huge budget, you need to have a plan on how to get it back. And risk management and risk calculation is actually part of the process. So you can, it's part of the just business overall, is saying of like, well, what are we going to use this money for? What's the chances of return? How much profit are we going to make? Are we going to lose? Is this going to be a loss leader? Is this, what's the purpose of what's this money supposed to do? What's the outcome supposed to be? And when you have larger companies, there's more people involved with that, and there's more people who, don't want to take these risks. The larger the group, it's also harder to manage. It's also what happens especially with public companies, or when you have a lot of investor money, is just because they're an investor in the video game market doesn't mean they actually kind of care or are involved in video games at all. They could just, video games are the hottest market for entertainment right now. It outclasses and outshines movies and music. Like, it's billions and billions of dollars being made here, and people want in on that. People who have millions, they want to put that into a project that's going to make millions back, so they can increase their capital. do they know anything about games? No, they're just the person with the money. They give it to the people who know stuff about games to make it. That being said, since it's their money, and this is usually what you see with producers, is they still want, some sort of say or still want to oversee it, and they still have to be convinced to give their money to a certain studio because, these studios are still competing with certain investors for if it's a publisher or if it's an internal thing, they still have to get board approval and executive approval to, release the funds to them to be able to use it for. And if that's the case, if you're depending on how high the risk is, it's easier for the execs just to say no, which is stick with, what's known, what's true, what we can calculate and what we can, have a certain risk tolerance for, okay, we're doing the same thing. Well, maybe the market gets tired of it and maybe it doesn't sell as well, but it will still sell, and it won't hurt brand image. We won't have a reputation hit, all that kind of stuff. But for the most thing, at least for larger companies, it comes down to just money and whose money it is and kind of how much of a say they have. If they're not involved in the gaming sector, you're going to have a really hard time convincing them to make your dream game because they're not going to care. They're not going to see, the potential. They're not going to see why it's going to sell. You're not going to have any evidence saying, no, people want this. This is what people want. Like I asked my buddies and they absolutely love this game. You would need, concrete evidence of, huge examples. This is why we're saying before, it usually takes an indie or AA studio to take a risk before a AAA studio implements it, because now they have that market data and say, hey, look, they did this, and now they have millions of people doing it. We can do the same thing for this much and still make millions off it as well.
Yep. Yep, exactly. You got to look at it from the perspective of the guy who gives the money. When you come to him to say, hey, we want to make the third part of this game series now, because the first two have been growing and growing, and we want to completely change it. He's going to be like, wait. Why can't we just do the same thing again and make more money? And that's what I would say.
But sometimes, unfortunately, the opposite happens where they try to do something new because maybe the second didn't sell well as they hoped. So they want to, drum up a bunch of new stuff. They don't really know what they're doing. And then stuff goes bad, which is an example of the game that doesn't exist, Dead Space 3. The second one did well, but didn't sell to their expectations, so they stepped in to improve the sales and improve the design of the game. They didn't know what they were doing. They should have left it to, the formula that was there and proven to be working. And, they wanted more profit for the risk of the return. And then, unfortunately, they took a risk on that and had a bad time. Got Space Country.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. But yeah, when you say you sound like, you honestly just sound like anybody with money that's investing it. Even if you love games and understand games, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we want $60 million to make this game and we want to make it different than the last two. Even if you love that idea, you're going to hesitate. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it also comes down to like effort things too as well. It's like how hands-on do you want to be? How if it's a lot of money, you're going to sit there and then all of a sudden the project starts going bad. Are you going to pull your money out? There's a lot to it. And then I'm going to kind of expand on kind of what happens when AAA studios get the money and kind of where they try to go with it and what they try and do with it. The main thing that we see with AAA studios is bleeding edge technology. If they can't innovate on a game design level, they can at least try to innovate on the game technology itself. This is kind of what we've been seeing for the last, almost forever with this model of AAA studios not taking risks on the game design front. To compete, they put a lot of their money on, the actual graphic fidelity. They put it on the quality of the animations, and we have motion capture. We have, Hollywood actors. We have, like amazing vocal performances. You get full, like the technology to be able to, a full symphony or maybe dynamic technology. They push forward in that way, which is, they kind of see that as a cost going forward, but not all AAA studios want to foot the bill for that, especially depending on how big of a scope and how big of a risk the new technology is. Like something like Star Citizen. Hopefully I'm getting the name wrong on that. Hopefully that's what it's called. It's been so long. Yeah, I'm sure that was probably pitched to a bunch of AAA studios originally with like this grand idea, and it needs a whole lot of new technology, and they don't want to pay for it because they don't know how it's going to turn out. Right? It's not like if it's an in-house thing and they push technology forward, and the investor is part of investing in the company itself, they're a bit more interested because now it's a resource and a technology that the company can keep reusing, such as like the Snowdrop engine or like the Rage engine for, I think it's the Rockstar engine's called that. I can't remember what it's called, or maybe it's RAM. Anyways, the developing of in-house technology and in-house engines and stuff like that, it's very expensive. You have to hire, almost the best of the best. A lot of research and development. And some AAA studios are kind of like, no, we'd rather just, pay for that, and which is fine. But then, on that competitive level, when you build your own engine, and you have that budget for it, then you start having, the crazy kind of features that no one else has. We're going to start kind of seeing that with PS5 and the risk they took with some of their, storage and stuff like that. With, hey, we're going to have no loading screens. Our developers can utilize this new tech we're putting in, and it'll be the ones that have in-house engines. I don't know how long it'll be until like Unreal. I think Unreal 5 will probably support it, but I don't think other engines will support direct storage right out of the gate, or especially for the PS5 implementation.
There's a lot smaller risk for Sony bringing out new tech, because they tend to bring out something new on every console, and every console they have sells pretty well, because they know how to make a proper dev kit. They know how to make the instruction. They know how to get them the tools they need to build the games on their console, just because of their history of it.
Yeah, it's maybe not a huge risk, but there's still a risk, because there's an added cost to it. Like I said, there's research and development. There's also now the problem with the Xbox implementation is really easy for expandable storage, whereas PlayStation 5 is very complicated for expandable storage, which isn't a big deal for everyone, but that's a competitive edge that they've lost. So maybe people weren't that enthralled in the loading screen stuff, but they wanted to be able to install more than 2 or 3 games. But we haven't really had a huge example of the no loading screens yet. Once I think the new Ratchet Clank comes out and you can jump between rifts, or a bunch of other game developers really start utilizing it, you'll see the kind of the risk payoff a bit more. But like I said, that's bleeding edge technology. You have to convince someone, hey, we need to push this forward. Game developers themselves, they're not really too much going to be profit oriented. They just want to, push the industry forward, see what we can do. Everyone wants to do the next crazy thing and see how far and how, fantastic we can do this. Put my next.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about the studio doing it bigger. And that's exactly what happens when you have that money, right? Is what the people like, so you do what the people like best. Yeah, and that's where your money goes, is doing what's already there better than other people do it. Speaking of technology, Sony put all their eggs in the Blu-ray basket with the PS3. Yep. Whoops.
And it worked.
I know a lot of people.
Why is that a whoops?
Oh wait, yeah, right. Blu-ray was the good one, right? HD DVD failed.
Yep.
I mean, I thought Blu-ray is worthless already by that point in my mind. Is why I say whoops. But I forget that other people actually liked them. I never owned a single one.
I know a lot of people who bought a PS3 just for the Blu-ray player, because it was cheaper than other Blu-ray players, as well as it helped tap into the family market. Kids can't buy their own game systems. They don't have jobs, but now it's a lot easier for your kid, or for a kid, to convince their parents, saying, hey, it can play Blu-ray. We don't have to buy a DVD player anymore. You get me this, and you can watch your movies, on it, and I can play my games. And now it's one system for both, and became a lot easier appetite for parents to buy, rather than just buying it just for the kids. It's now a thing for themselves as well. And I think it really helped their sales in that end.
Yeah, when you think of it as being priced under the price of a Blu-ray player, and being a Blu-ray player and a PS3, it all of a sudden becomes a no-brainer.
Yeah, and same with the PS4. Like, a lot of people did not have a standalone Blu-ray player. I would say that there's a fairly large portion of the market that does not use a standalone Blu-ray player. They'll have something like a PS3 or a PS4 that can play back Blu-rays just fine, and just use that instead.
PlayStations really are pretty marvelous little devices. I guess not so little anymore.
They're not little, they're massive. I'm still shocked at the size of the one I have. It's just...
Yeah, it's a chunky boy.
I don't even put it on my entertainment unit. It's just standing beside it, because I didn't want to... It just takes up so much room. I'm going to tuck you over to the side here.
Yeah, well, I guess I technically have a Blu-ray player, because I have a PS3, a PS4, and a PS5. But I've never had like a a Blu-ray player, and I've never owned a Blu-ray disc other than when games were on Blu-ray. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything's been digital for me since
Looking.
Since I was in high school, I've had RAID arrays of storage, like even back in the old AVI days, just filled. I've always been digital.
What about Laserdisc? Laserdisc is where
I had a buddy with
Laserdisc is
Laserdisc.
actually super cool technology. Like ridiculously cool technology. Terrible, super expensive, don't buy it, but super cool technology.
That same buddy with the Virtual Boy also has a Laserdisc player.
Of course he does. It's 500
quality-
gigabytes worth it, or 1 terabyte PS4 Pro. 500 gigs is plenty.
You can always get an external drive too. I have an external drive for mine, and you can just up to 8 terabytes. I think the USB supports, or maybe it's 6. But yeah, I got the 1 terabyte, and I don't think I've maxed that out. And I also just have a 2 terabyte drive in case. And like I said, you can usually get those 2 terabyte drives for really cheap on sale.
And you can also just swap in whatever SSD you want. It's just a SATA connection.
The Dragon Lair, yeah, they were Laserdisc, which was when I was making their games and a movie joke. But I was surprised with the quality. I watched Star Wars on Laserdisc, and it was really like the quality was really good, like way better than just traditional DVD. And then to the part we got to flip to side B, and I was like, "Oh right,
Oh, that's why you failed.
And they're huge, like
Yeah, no, I
storage-wise. Oh my
remember them.
God.
My buddy had a bunch of them. They're like the size of a record, like a vinyl record, and they're double-sided.
They were bigger. They were big discs.
Yeah, there's a really cool term for them too, for some that are damaged just over time or weren't produced properly.
Only 360.
And it's called laser rot. Some of the discs have laser rot, which is just like, I think is the coolest sounding word for a disc just going bad. Oh man, it's got laser rot. It's like, oh, it's so
Sounds
future.
metal as fuck.
Yeah.
So we've I have to mention one of my favorite risks that was taken, and it doesn't really qualify because it's technically before AAA was much of a thing, but it was AAA in its era, which was Secret of Mana. And that game is as close to AAA as you're gonna get when it comes to game development. That was right on the cusp of it. Final Fantasy VII is when it's truly considered to have started. But same company, so they were still spending more than everyone else at the time. And they elected to use 30% of the cartridge's working memory. 30% of the available memory to make the whole game on the intro screen.
And it worked. It was a gorgeous intro screen.
It hooked you instantly. Before you even hit the start button, you're like, must play this. But they didn't use any of that memory ever again. It was completely burned. It wasn't ever referenced. None of those sprites used to make up that scrolling high-res image could ever be used again because it was so different than the rest of the game. And the whale call was never used again.
Which is kind of a shame.
So they really just burned it to make an intro. But could you imagine? I just, every time I hear that story, I got to imagine the manager. The guy who, like, at some level, they come up to him like, okay, so we want to use 30% of all of this just on the start screen. Can we do that? And someone had
We
to
made
say
this
yes.
Sick intro screen. But it takes up 30% of the cartridge. Like, that's a big risk.
That's a hefty commitment, especially when you consider, like, a lot of the other games that came out similar era, Chrono Trigger, the names are only 5 characters, so you can only get CRONO for the main character because that's how much memory they had. So when you're using 30% on the intro of another grand RPG, that's ballsy. That's ballsy. First PS1 game that had multiple discs.
It depends on how you define discs. Like specifically CD discs, yes, because it was the first console to widely use them. But there was also like the floppy disk attachment for the Super Nintendo, which basically only sold in Japan.
Yeah.
But you would just be swapping floppies.
Yeah. Floppy swapping, disc swapping was nothing new. It was a accepted standard at the time by the time PS1 came out.
Yeah, the risk would more so be on just the scope and content of the game. If you're making a game that's across multiple discs and everyone else is making a game that fits on a single disc, it's probably going to mean a lot more development and a lot more, content that you're putting out there, as well as you now cost twice as much to make your game, or to produce the game, at least on a publishing level for the hardware itself for the disc, as well as there's a technology risk between having it support that, if the depending what you have in house, if it already supports it or not. There's a bunch of smaller stuff there as well, but yeah, there's quite a bit of risks for that.
I mean, you're already looking at a pretty big bump up in capabilities for game development, right? So it takes a little bit. Yeah, Lost Odyssey on the 360 was 4 HD DVDs. It was huge.
I remember
No, those were standard DVDs. 4 standard DVDs.
Nope.
The Xbox 360 needed an attachment to play HD DVDs.
It was HDRs I needed for burning.
Yeah, DVD HDR is the standard for high definition, aka dual layer DVDs that you can record to.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was DL DVDs. That's what was special about them. 4 dual layer DVDs. Which was a hefty chunk of data. HD DVD was a USB attachment. Thank you. Which is a shame because I've worked with a lot of 360s. I'm just spacing
old
on names. Yeah. I've worked with too many of them by this point. I also hacked the first Xbox a whole lot, and yeah. And then I passed on the torch to Pseudo, and he started hacking with PSPs and other ones. A lot of handhelds.
Man, the PSP was actually a really fun console to hack.
The battery is wild. You go through a battery. I still have my battery, I think. I should see if that's still an okay thing to own.
Yeah. Yeah, we turned the first Xbox into everything. We got a little off topic here, but yeah, we turned the first Xbox into everything.
To address Mole's comment, Halo Combat Evolved, it was a massive leap in a lot of things. It was still kind of following a bit of a FPS formula that was kind of been around for a bit, but it's kind of what Xbox wanted to push forward with Xbox Live, and started doing the kind of multiplayer on consoles and stuff like that, and bringing deathmatch there and all that kind of stuff as well. There's a bunch of technological stuff that went along with it too. It was considered a leap forward, and that's something I want to use to transition into another risk that AAA studios face, is what we talked about before too, is they face a severe backlash for failing, especially for either genre swapping or improving on kind of existing, not even so much if it's just their game. If it can be a certain game franchise like Halo, overall it's changed quite a bit since Halo 1, but the overall formula is still kind of there, where you're Master Chief, you're a Spartan, you're going and you're going to shoot the Covenant, or some sort of alien, you get some vehicles to drive around with. It's a lot has been added, but the core its core has kind of stayed relatively the same. And then when they did kind of venture off to it, we kind of see how that went with ODST. Wasn't really,
that was a
great
game.
It was a game, but they're still doing it, and it's a thing too where they faced the backlash for that. And I don't know if it was their main studio that made it. I think it was a smaller studio, but it still needs to get approved by the AAA IP holder for that. And there's backlash for that. Like I said, even if it's not even just the same game, we can look at Cyberpunk. Or CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk, they faced an image backlash, right? Like if they fail, if they hype it up and they fail, it looks bad kind of across the board for the company itself. It's really bad press, and it's really hard to kind of recover from that. It's easier to kind of just, as people say, stick with what and okay, if it fails, you don't get a huge blame because there wasn't a huge risk. They just kept making the same game, and people kind of wanted it. It just didn't, turns out people don't always know what they want. Next one comes out, it's the same. People are like, okay, well, we're kind of bored with it. We're not going to buy it as much or play it as much. But the overall backlash isn't as strong because they didn't try something new. They didn't market it. They didn't take a risk. And there aren't the people that are, saying they failed. They're just like, oh, it's just, I'm not as interested in the series anymore, or it's just, not as good as some other stuff that's out there.
Yeah, and it's like we've been saying quite a bit. This chat. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But it's these risks are something that often have to do with scoping, sometimes have to do with direction, but always have to do with, are we actually going to make our money back? And ODST sold, but it left a bad taste in people's mouths. So it was damaging to the future of the Halo brand.
Yep. Yep. In a more positive example, since we've been doing a bunch of trashy ones, Squaresoft's final hurrah with Final Fantasy was probably the biggest risk of the Final Fantasy series, which was Final Fantasy XI. They even numbered it within the main series, but turned it into an MMO on the PlayStation 2, constantly online. What a wild idea.
Did the original PS2 have a modem in it?
No, they had to release a modem attachment. Yeah, they needed to release a modem attachment. You needed to get an attachment.
They built it into the Slim, but it didn't have it on the original. So if you had the original PS2, you had to get an add-on in order to get your modem attached to it, and then you had to pay the subscription in order to have your connection active, and then you had to buy the game, and then the game was really hard.
Wonderful game.
There was a lot of barriers to that game, and it did kind of blow up in their face, but not for the reasons that one would expect.
Yep. WoW was not a risk. Just for the, I wouldn't say there's almost no difference from EverQuest. They just went, let's take the most popular game in existence and polish the hell out of it.
Yeah, I mean, we say it's not a risk because it succeeded. We kind of have that bias towards that.
Oh, I mean, there's always the risk: are we going to do it well or not? But the formula was a known formula. If the formula's done well, it's probably going to work. It's not a huge risk.
I'd say any MMO is a risk just because they're so expensive to make. Like look at how many tried to compete against WoW, right? Look how many other people tried to do the same thing of let's take WoW's formula and polish it.
They still failed. There could have been another good MMO. Their failure was their approach. And that's a failure. And that's just business risk, period. You know, it's no different than the risk that you face when you open a cake shop.
Yeah, it's a risk.
Yeah, there's always risk, but you're not, in the terms of the game, it's not a risky game. It's a pretty safe about design. No, I'm talking. No, every MMO since WoW tried to compete with WoW and died.
Yeah, but like because WoW it stood up pretty. Like I'd say, it's still they're taking that IP, that was just an RTS IP, and say, hey, let's make a MMO out of it. It's they did a lot of stuff right in that first time. The stuff that hadn't really they copied the formula, but there's still a lot of stuff they did right, not just on the game itself and some design levels, as well as some the lore that was put into it. And I remember the first one, there was a lot of issues they had to sort out, and they got to a state where it's pretty good, and now we look at where it is now, but it's still kicking, still dragging along somehow. But
you'll get no arguments from me that WoW was wonderfully designed and well thought out and had great team, and that old Blizzard team that was doing stuff back then was phenomenal. Everything they did succeeded, and that's probably why they managed to get such a budget to do this. And it was a bit of a risky budget. Absolutely, every MMO is a risky budget, but they weren't going out on a limb with the game. They were literally just going like, let's go with a really polished and accessible EverQuest. And they made a really polished and accessible EverQuest, and it sold exactly as well as you would expect a really polished and accessible EverQuest to sell.
R.I.P. StarCraft Ghost.
R.I.P. StarCraft Ghost. You see, every MMO...
I'm still sad that game doesn't exist.
I got to do my little MMO rant. See, the reason all the other MMOs failed is because they came in and they tried to be the next WoW killer. and you're never gonna kill it. Stop trying. That's not the approach. There's a huge audience of more hardcore gamers that want a more hardcore MMO experience that are completely uncatered to. There's nothing on the market that does it well or right. And if you made a good one and went, fuck WoW, it can have its casual market, let's address the serious hardcore market and give them a game to play, we would come and play it in droves. I promise you, it would succeed alongside it in its own niche. Please.
But there's the key word there, niche.
It's not going to be as huge.
It'll never be as successful as WoW. And in order to create something on the scale of WoW, the budget that is required for that is astronomical. Just astronomically huge. And you've got to be okay with basically being in the red for 5 to 10 years.
Yep. Nothing's going to launch and beat WoW. You have to exist in your niche. And there is a not insignificant size of players that would love a more hardcore MMO experience.
No, and that I do not disagree with at all.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is absolutely 100% true. It's just the amount of money you would have to invest in order to make that product for a smaller niche market is in itself a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pantheon shows it.
Why we've seen so many WoW killers, they say, is that's typically the way they got their funding is they look at the market share. They don't look at it as like the whole market. They just look at the MMO market share and saying, hey, look, WoW's got it all. And they're kind of looking at it as like, you know, the existing market. If anyone who's going to be playing an MMO is currently playing WoW. So if we want to, you know, get into this market, we need to take slices from the other games, right? Instead of, you know, seeing that there's kind of an absence, there's an untapped little bit of, you know, people who just aren't playing MMOs at all right now, and they can come in and there's enough room for those people to come over. And then as that happens, they can start cutting into WoW. But, you know, for budget, they say we need to take WoW. So we need to do what WoW is doing, but better, so that people who are playing WoW will come play our game instead. But they also fail on the fact that it's a community thing too, and you can't just instantly make a community. And even if WoW isn't as good like on a tech side or even on just overall things, it's what people have been using for a long time. It's where their communities are. It's guilds and stuff like that. You'd have to somehow import guilds over, which is I saw that happening in WildStar and in Rift, and they started off pretty well, but it's also just like it's the budget thing too. And as soon as they don't start doing well and they don't have the expectations they're meeting and they're seeing that WoW isn't dying, then of course investors panic and it's hard to get, you know, more money to keep it alive.
Yeah. People should just accept that WoW is the thing and there's room for more than one game in the MMO market.
It is a juggernaut. You cannot compete with it. Not until Bobby Kotick ruins it. And it's coming, but it hasn't happened yet.
I think it already has happened. It's just people take a long time to realize that an IP has been ruined. I mean, look at Elder Scrolls.
Be that as it may, the ruination of WoW has not come to pass. Like, regardless of what your thoughts are on its mechanics, how it's marketed, et cetera, it's still a juggernaut. You cannot fight it. So you have to go around it.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things that is just going to kind of kill itself. Like it's going to be their own folly that's going to lead them to things, rather than something coming in and taking it. And so it's kind of most of the thing with communities. It's going to be when those communities, you know, age and dissipate, or, you know, maybe they don't cultivate it as well. Maybe they start, you know, not having it be as team friendly, or they put some of that stuff like that. Then we'll see it kind of die out. But it's not going to be one game that swoops and then everyone playing WoW is like, this is what I'm looking for. Because at least from the players that I know, like Dea's saying, they're more on the casual side and not really playing it because they love WoW. They're playing it because WoW is good and it's fun. It fits what they want to do, but also their friends are playing it. A lot of online friends are playing it. They already have their community there. And if a new game comes in, you know, it's going to be hard to make them to switch because they need all their friends and stuff there.
To Mole's point, MMOs can work today. The reason that communities don't really form in them is because the developers are really, really, really concerned with people being able to complete the content. So they make it easy enough that people can complete the content without too much friction. Sort of the, you know, Bethesda approach. Make it frictionless and people won't stop playing your game. And when you do that, there's no need to party with anyone. So when there's no need to work with anybody else, no communities ever form because you never talk to anybody else unless you need to. But as soon as your content is hard enough that I can't do this by myself, if I want to play this game, I have to work with somebody else. I start talking to other people. I meet a couple people. I start making friends in the game. I come back to the game. Hard content makes the MMOs, and they've been going the wrong way.
Doesn't even necessarily have to be like that hard as well. It just needs to promote collaboration.
Yep.
And I think it's just, even that's what you find in a lot of games that promote collaboration is that they're not getting communities behind them, which we've seen with battle royales. Because solo, those games are okay. They're not the best.
Okay is a strong word.
They're, I mean, like a lot of people enjoy them still solo, but if it was just a solo experience, they'd be nothing like they are with its team because it's community, right? And then you can't always get a full squad of people with your friends, but then you play with your friends as friends, and you play with communities that you form in development. Now you have a Discord that everyone kind of joins and plays together. Now you have a whole community of people that will come to play these kind of games together, and that's what kind of solidifies them. And it's like, well, most of these games aren't even that great. It's just mostly because people like playing games with friends.
Yeah.
So why don't more publishers rely on co-op then, just for the difficulty of single player, up the difficulty of the single player game for each friend who joins and let people pick? Because that's really hard to do.
Yeah. They're still around and they're still big. The Division 2 and the Division are that. They're co-op and then more people join. It's more. Outriders just came out and that's exactly what that is. And it is seeming to do really well. There's a lot of people actually still playing it if you look at the Steam charts. So they're still doing it. It's just like couch co-op died because couch co-op, the other person on the couch didn't pay for the game. So they would want to just do online co-op, and then online co-op is, kind of difficult to do for a lot of those certain styles of games. And it's not always something that, people want to take that risk on.
Yeah.
And also just like making the game work without just becoming bullet spongy and awful is difficult with multiple players, especially if multiple players have differing skill levels.
In the MMO front, why you can't just do the scaling thing, aside from it being hard, is again, people won't work together. There's no need to. I can go do it by myself. I'll just go do it by myself. If I don't have to wait for somebody else and organize other people, that all takes time, right? If I can just go do it by myself, that's way more efficient. I'm just going to go do it by myself and keep going. So, and I like the team play.
Yes. For Division 2, I think you have a max party size of 4, and the game until then is just single player. The only real MMO part of it is like the Dark Zone and like the PvP areas. But other than that, the game is just a loot shooter, third-person loot shooter with cover mechanics that you can play with friends. And it's a lot more fun with friends because each person only gets 2 skills. I think there's 8 skills in general. So it's, I don't know. Like, people have their things, man. You can't just shit on people for liking a certain genre. Like, we can.
He didn't shit on them.
We can. We're just wrong to do it.
Yeah, it's just like I play like even Outriders. Like I could we always hype on like a game. If we say it's fun with friends, it's not good, which is that's a true statement and stuff like that. But there's still a lot of they still made a game that you can play with friends. Is still something that'll be commendable to the experience. You can still do that and do it wrong and have co-op go wrong. I've played a Resident Evil game where when you're playing as the co-op, the second player, you don't get weapons. You get to point at things.
RE's co-op is so bad.
And then you get to point at collectibles for the other person to pick up, and you point at weak spots, and that's all you do. And it's like, I still beat it, but it's like it wasn't the best experience. So co-op can still be done wrong. And there's also co-op games that just try to do, hey, let's take the single player and just duplicate it and just put it in there. And well, now the game's too easy. And then it also just doesn't make sense because in the cutscenes, there's 2 of the main character, or there's just one of the main character, and it breaks immersion. There's still a lot of stuff that kind of that goes into this as well. I really hope co-op, extends and comes back, because I prefer co-op games than to like multiplayer competitive games. But we kind of just see a lot of multiplayer co-op competitive games now.
Yeah, co-opetition is a whole thing as well. Like, just as a little bit of a tangent, like the Borderlands loot system, for instance, was not instanced originally. You had to fight over loot. And like that co-opetition, as the phrase is a whole thing, because like you're still working cooperatively to complete your goal, but there's this little competition in between the two players that are cooperating, and whole different thing.
I'm not sure about WoW being the first to have not have instanced zones. I'm sure there was some early MMOs that did not have instanced zones before the instanced zones were implemented.
We've talked about a bunch of why AAA studios don't take risks, but we can start kind of migrating over to, risks they do take, the more common ones, as well as then give some examples of the more obscure risks that they take.
Some nice out there examples of, whoa, you did that, huh? So while Pseudo's giving some examples, what does the chat think are some common some risks you think you see regularly from the AAAs? Guys I played Borderlands 1 with, we had one guy on the team we had to watch constantly because he would always just rush the loot chests and take all the good guns for himself.
Yeah, and it was always the Siren because she was fastest.
Yeah, I played a lot of Diablo 2. That was non-instanced loot as well. That was just an accepted thing in that game. Somebody drops something on the ground to show somebody else, and you run by and grab it. They don't even have a right to complain. It's like, you put it on the ground. That's the way the game's played.
Finders keepers.
Yep.
Oh god. I like the middle ground where there can be shared loot, but then you can roll on like big drops and stuff like that, or have the ability to choose where it goes to. I like collaboration on that front. So it feels real good to like get a nice weapon, but then be like, you know what, I don't really know it. I want to power up my teammates too, because we want to get through this together.
I think MMOs did loot well for the 5-man dungeons. Anything like white, like non-important, just gets round robin divvied up amongst the party, and then whenever something like magical and possibly usable drops, everybody has the option to roll on it or pass on it. I like that.
Yeah, risks can be kind of like they are pretty few in AAA studios, but like there's always going to be a risk no matter what. But the ones we kind of look at are maybe kind of the outliers, or what's some reoccurring stuff they do that's pushing a bit, like it can kind of fail on. And at least the first that comes to my mind that we were saying before is they need to compete with AAA and indie, and the way that they do that is usually on a with technology and pushing that forward and doing things like maybe not so much game design focused, or the games different. Like if you look at a lot of Naughty Dog's games, they don't differ a whole lot from each other. People
or control very well, or have good bosses.
But then they really put a lot of effort into the actual tech of their engines, like the kind of story mechanics that they can provide, like how they deliver their stories. How they have full motion capture, full face capture, all that stuff. The actors that they're hiring, are very, very talented. All that kind of stuff. It's stuff that AA and indie can't really do. Makes them stand out. It's still a risk because if it doesn't go well, it fails. They're going to lose a lot of money because it's expensive. But it's also worth it to them, and it's not as going to be as huge as a risk because it's technology they get to keep and then keep pushing forward, and that kind of becomes their, their image or what they're trying to do. So that's why you see that, at least for right now, the biggest difference between a lot of games I find is either just graphic technology. You don't really see, like, at least recently, you don't really see AA or indie games that'll utilize ray tracing or any kind of, newer, even AAA games can't even really do them yet. But like that's the kind of example of like a new tech comes out that, usually only a AAA studios can afford to put into their engines, or even just the kind of motion captured cutscenes or motion capture animations, or just even the kind of cast of voice actors that they can have, or even just being able to pull in like a movie star, like let's say Keanu Reeves into Cyberpunk, right? Like a AA or indie game is gonna have a really hard time doing that without, an already established reputation or the budget to pay them, as well as, just the cost effective of why would we pay for that rather than, putting the money elsewhere.
Yeah, and like you, well, we all really have talked about, like, games don't need to be that expensive. They don't. You can make great games on a double or single A budget.
You can make great games on an indie budget. Hollow Knight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They don't need to be that expensive, but there is prestige that comes with it. You say, oh, we're spending, $60 million on this game, $100 million on this game. And then it gets traction. You've got this marketing that's applied to it. You can sort of be like, oh wow, all of these new things that are going to be coming out with this game, all of this new technology that they've developed. It is a risk to spend that much on it, but it is also sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that a lot of that budget ends up going to marketing, and a lot of it goes to new technology, which brings in people who want to see that new technology. So there's a balancing act between how much you spend on a game, how much you spend on its marketing, and what risks you take in the gameplay style. Because like we were talking about before, if you've spent $100 million making something, you probably want to make that back. That's a lot of money.
As well as if you're trying to sell it for, full price. And what AAA studios are trying to do now is say, hey, we have these huge budgets and our games aren't making it back, so we need to increase the cost of games rather than make our games sell more or make cheaper games. So that's kind of where things are going right now as well.
Pay $180 for the Ultimate Edition, which is the only way that you can get all of this content.
Yeah. So another risk that they tend to take, a lot more common than the game side of things, such as business practices and monetization risks. And we saw this kind of apex in the last couple of years with loot crates. They were making a lot of money selling their games, but they want to make more. And, even if they're still profitable, if someone else is now making a whole lot more in the revenue call, your execs are going to be like, well, why can't we do what they're doing to make the same amount of profit? And it's harder to be like, well,
because it's predatory.
It'll be bad press or it's morals, and then it's like, but it's money, and we can just hire a PR team. Which I'm going to say, with larger budgets also come a larger PR team. So you can do you can really push the boundaries on ethical and kind of the moralness of your development, and then survive the backlash, and then still make a profit, and then still keep kind of doing it. And we've been seeing this a lot with, quite a few of the AAAs that have been partaking in this, and a lot of them get taken to court, and somehow, it's not this huge deal, and people aren't freaking out that it's like, oh yeah, we hired psychologists to figure out how we can get the kids most addicted to our game so they could spend the most money on our virtual slot machines. And it's like, how does that not sound terrible? It's like, oh, we'll hire a bunch of PR people to change the names. Now there's surprise mechanics, and now they're, all this other stuff. So and then they can, as well as just pay off reviews. That's something that also happens a lot of times with AAAs. You can make the same game or take a risk, and then now you can pay a reviewer, put embargo on it, publish good stories by paying reviewers to release good press for yourself. Okay, the story comes out about the poor treatment of your workers. Okay, well, we're going to release one about how we bought all of our workers foosball machines, and there's an Xbox and a PS3 for everyone, or everyone gets their own Switch, or they have infinite paid time off, even though if you look into the metrics, nobody can use it, because if they use it, we'll let them go. A lot of the stuff that kind of happens, and unfortunately not a good risk for gaming and financing, but it's this kind of thing we see that with larger money, you can kind of buy your way out of a lot of these kind of situations. You can do a lot more of this predatory stuff. Whereas if you look at it, if a AA or triple or an indie game try to come out with heavy microtransactions or heavy predatory design, they would just get destroyed. They would not be able to survive. They could not survive the PR backlash. They could not, pay for good favor. They could not do anything around it, because it is, a lot of it is wrong, and that should be how people react. It's just kind of an unfortunate side of thing. Another side of that too is a risk that I've been seeing a lot more common lately, and as well with Cyberpunk, is releasing games before they're finished. That's a huge risk. I don't know why they do it. I know why they do it, but I wish I didn't.
Pre-orders. Stop pre-ordering video games.
God, yeah, it's that where it comes down to, it's why everyone's doing it. It's money, right? No one wants to work for free. They do deserve to get paid for it, but it's just these practices that people have dug themselves into, and these holes that unfortunately get dug into going after this, right? Like, I think if Cyberpunk had another year or year and a half of development time, it would
be amazing.
Such a solid game. And that's probably what's going to happen with Halo. Halo, like that was a huge risk they took as well. Something I hadn't seen in a while is of one examples I wanted to bring up later is they delayed their game for a year. It was the first Xbox launch without a Halo game, I believe. Microsoft, I don't think had any first-party games on their launch, so it was a huge risk for them to delay it a year because that number one hadn't been done. Number two, everyone else just kind of can survive a lot of the backlash. But they put out that trailer, and everyone saw that brute or whatever the hell that thing was, and they had some backlash on that. And thankfully, they took that and said, hey, we can release it now. It's going to be, kind of a bad thing. We'll still make the money because people are going to buy it. Whatever, we can survive it and, patch it up later or, buy some good stuff, go forward. But thankfully, they said, no, we'll just take the year hit, give everyone a year. Things have been wild. Let's do that. So I'm really hoping that, it still comes out well. I'm really hoping that it comes out great and it can be a good example of saying, hey, we don't have to release early just to, appease either investment deadlines, hopefully not trade orders, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Is releasing games really a risk still? Or is it just stupid at this point? Because they've been doing it since E.T. filled a landfill on the Atari. That's what did that game in. Was, hey, we need to release it for Christmas. Push it. Yeah. Yeah, you can get it out in like a month, right? Okay. And then they released it, and everyone was like, "What the fuck is this?" Yeah. It was nothing because they gave him no time. Like, oh yeah, you can just make a game, right? Nobody really. But I mean, they're still doing it today.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I said that was never done. It's just, I've seen the quality of what's been happening. I mean, when you look at the console era, there was a standard that was put into place that your game can't crash the system.
That's fine.
You had to meet. Had to meet codes.
They did bring it up a lot in the final pressing. This is the only issue you're ever gonna get era. I agree.
Yeah, so that was addressed because it was mostly with the era of being able to patch after. This kind of made a huge resurgence, and back then when the games were released early, they were released being like, this is done. This is as good as it's going to get. This is done. We need to release it, make some money. Whereas now it's releasing before they know it's done, and they still plan to make it done after, but still rake in all that money real quick and then do a re-release and maybe a re-release version and make some more money down the line. So we can make money now rather than money later. And like I said, it's one of the things we're seeing with the ability to patch later, those first day patches that are like 50 gigs to 100 gigs for some games and all this other stuff of like, they're trying to do this when, there's a risk involved with that, right? There's a lot of stuff like that. And then there's the backlash of, you release an unfinished game that's going to be huge hit on your studio for its quality. And unfortunately, the most recent example, of course, is still Cyberpunk. Look what happened to that. But it's been happening for a lot of games. Like look at No Man's Sky, which is not a AAA, but it can still happen where you overpromise, don't have all the features in place, but you still need to release. And unfortunately for AA and Indie, usually it's because you're actually running out of money, and it's going to be hard to get more money from a publisher that already gave you a bunch of money, and now you spent it all and it's not done. So you just need to release it, and hopefully you get your money back. And thankfully for them, the money they made off that, they turned around and actually finished the game to what they said it would be. But we're kind of seeing this in AAA studios. They're like, oh wait, we can just release them early and fix them later, and people aren't going to be that mad about it. And it's definitely a big risk, especially at the level it is. Like I'm sure even in a year from now, Cyberpunk wouldn't have been like fully finished to their imagination or to what their scope was, but it would have been playable, which is we're getting to a point where there's so much stuff that's just unplayable, or it's just stuff that should be there that isn't there, and at some point someone needs to make a decision being like, you know what, it's good enough, right? Like this is good enough, let's put it out there, let's not delay it. It's unfortunately comes down to product management, but it's just something we're seeing where they have the ability to survive the kind of backlash for that as well. If you're an indie game, you don't have the marketing budget, so if you release an unfinished game, it's just not a good game and no one's going to look at it a second time. Where if you're a bigger studio, you can release an unfinished game, you can pay off reviewers, you can suppress other reviewers with embargoes,
you can release a roadmap. Ooh,
you can have so much marketing and so much hype up that everyone pre-orders, and then you have your money already, and then you try to do as much as you can to not give refunds, which is what happened with Fallout 76.
That one was really, really scummy. They purposely didn't let people even review it. There was no reviews. They came out with a great big wonderful PR press statement saying, because of the multiplayer aspect and wanting to keep everything fair between players, we're not going to distribute copies ahead of time for people to review. The scary part is after that, after the launch of the game, they came out with another statement saying, due to the successful launch of the game, we are going to continue this launch structure in the future.
AKA, if they don't know it's shit, they'll still buy it.
Literally what that press statement said. Literally what it said. Yeah, if they don't know it's shit, they still buy it, so we're going to keep doing it this way. And that, to Mole's point, with you were asking more risk to not release than to release in today's market. There are definitely successful studios that take their time and release on their own schedule and always release solid quality games that have developed a reputation and a following and are successful and respected.
Nintendo is really good for that. Nintendo has a lot of really bad things in general, but one thing they have is they polish their games. They will delay the hell out of it. Doesn't matter. They will make sure that it's going to be at least for the most part stable in what they've advertised. And like I said, like releasing it or not, like that's the risk there. And the risk that I've seen that they take, it's a risk to delay it. It's a risk to release it. But the risk that I'm seeing a lot more now is they just release it rather than delay it. Delay it was always a thing that came before. And it usually happens a lot earlier in the development cycle too. It's not like you get money and then they say, okay, come back in 4 years and let us know how it's doing it. It's usually like a yearly or even 6-month process, and a publisher can cancel, the contract in any part of that. After 6 months, they can see, hey, the development isn't what we thought it is. We don't think you're going to hit the time. We're going to pull the funding and, see ya. Sorry. So like that's kind of how that kind of unfortunately goes, but it's also them that decide to take the risk of, okay, well, they're not hitting the deadlines, but we'll give them more money and more time. We'll give them more money and more time. But eventually, that money can run out or the time can run out. And then let's say if the game's close to release, they can say, well, do we just release it anyways and try to make back some money at the, cost of our image? Or do we just cancel it and try to take that stuff and reuse it somewhere else so it's not a complete loss?
And this is something that we saw Blizzard, specifically Blizzard North, do a lot. They would take games to like having an E3 playable demo and then go, no, it's not fun enough, and just cancel the whole goddamn project. Which is something that, obviously costs a lot of money, both in development time and in marketing, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm so sad about StarCraft Ghost, but like the legacy that leaves of always hitting your marks, always releasing just all these incredible games, the legacy that has means that right up until Diablo 3, I bought literally everything with a Blizzard label on it.
Me too.
Literally everything.
Yep. Played them all. Every time they released a new game, oh, what's this? Because I was so used to everything that has that label on it just being gold. Here's another solid top tier game. Like for a while there, when you look at the franchise IPs they put out, look what they all turned into. As soon as they got a slight name for themselves after making Lost Vikings, which in itself has a pretty good name and following, they then went to Warcraft. Well, look at what Warcraft became. They made Diablo, and they made StarCraft. And well, you're hard-pressed to find somebody in the gaming world that doesn't know these IPs at this point, right? Like, they couldn't do any wrong. I had a lot of fun with Blackthorn back in the day. A very flawed game, but a great game for its time. Witcher 1 was a gong show indeed.
Yeah, even 3 had issues on release, but I think it's like the level that it was a whole nother one. And a lot of people, they polished it to a good state, but when Cyberpunk came out, it was like, this is going to take a long time before this is polishable. And it's the level of broken it was just wild, especially with the hype they have, because it's not like they didn't know when they were hyping it up for 2 years. They could have done what a lot of other games do. You kind of see there'd be a bunch of hype, and then you don't really see ads for it for a while, and then 2 or 3 years later, that trailers come back for it. And you're like, oh yeah, this is a game being made. It's because they understand that they can't overhype it, because the moment you start hyping it and try to sell pre-orders, people want those pre-orders. And then there's also like accounting involved, where if you've sold something, you eventually have to actually give them the product.
Yes, R.I.P. Blizzard. Same fate as Squaresoft, the original.
One interesting thing is like what Valve has done, and Gaben's inability to count to 3. And as much as like
complete inability,
really love, it's also like, like I said, it's to also not do it is still like, there's risk involved. It's an easier risk to take just to be like, we're not going to spend a bunch of money. But what they're doing is they're also taking a risk on their their studio name, and their studio name is one that's held up in high regards, and they could have made a lot of money by counting to 3 a few times. There's a lot of it's the same thing when we're saying with Blizzard, where it has the name on as people will buy it. It's the same thing. If they made Portal 3, people would buy it. If they made Left 4 Dead 3, people would buy it. If they made all this stuff with a 3 on it, especially Half-Life 3, people would buy it. And I think they noticed that they're at a level of hype where they probably can't live up to it, especially for Half-Life 3. I don't think the way that Half-Life 3 has been hyped, because people have been thinking it's been in development this whole time, when it most likely hasn't, or it was for a while, and I believe it got canceled because it was never going to live up to it. And no matter what they did, even though they'd make money, they would take such a damage to their reputation as a studio. And then, that's going to cost them more in the end, because they really, especially hosting their own store, they really need their name to be good. I'm sure people remember or not, but Steam for a long time was the bad guy. Before Steam, there wasn't really too much DRM, and not a lot of people wanted to go to DRM. And, myself included, I'm still not stoked on the idea. I liked having my discs and liked having them in my possession. I don't like the idea of that, for whatever reason, if they go away, my games can. And also their store just sucked. A lot of the stuff didn't work properly. A lot of people didn't like the name. It doesn't have the same feel it has now. And it's a big part of their success too, is, people hear Steam. There's still, of course, issues and jank and stuff that happens. They still do really weird things, but there's still a quality that is now established with it. And they don't want to, of course, risk or gamble that.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I think even if Half-Life 3 was the best shooter to date, for that style and experience, I still don't know if it would live up to the hype. There would still...
Yeah, I don't see it anyway.
Don't meet your heroes, right? Don't meet your heroes.
Yeah. It's one of those things where people don't really know what they want, because they don't know what it would be. And also just that era of gaming isn't really there. Like Half-Life and Half-Life 2 and stuff was in a era where there's still a lot of those kind of single-player, story-driven shooters. We don't see a whole lot of that anymore, at least to that degree. They're still around, but it can never be as good as people would think that kind of style of game would be. It was just it would cost so much for them to try it. For the money they would make on it probably wouldn't be worth it compared to the other places they're making their money, as well as how important that name reputation is. And if they do it well, their name doesn't get that much better. It's not like everyone is expecting it to be bad and they make it good. Everyone's like, yeah, Valve, everyone's expecting to be good, so if they make it good, it's just status quota. They don't get any points on that. They don't get any brownie points for it. But if they make it bad, they could risk kind of losing everything.
Yeah Big agree.
We can talk about some examples for the last bit.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We're getting close to there. So a fun first one that I thought was a really interesting gamble and idea was Spore.
Yeah.
That game was
flopped.
Oh, it flopped hard.
So much potential.
It had a lot of potential, but I didn't think I having a more mature mind and thinking back to that game and what they were trying to do, I don't think there's a team on the planet that could pull it off.
No, they were just trying to do too much. And again, we say it all the time. It's a scoping problem. Like they were trying to take on this just incredible, enormous project. And it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. Like it's just gonna take years and 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 years to do that well.
You'd need 5 teams making 5 games with 5 budgets all connected together to do it properly. Because
And at least another team working on the connection bits.
Yeah. Because what ended up happening with it, I don't know if any of you played it. I played it and finished it once and then never touched it again. But I wanted to see what it was all about because it was really cool and creative. And the problem with the game is that there's so many genres to it that they couldn't spend the time to add depth to any of them, and they wanted you to complete the game in a reasonable amount of time. So all you end up doing is playing a bunch of really thin mini games that are loosely connected to each other, and it just ends up feeling very disjointed and hollow, and there's no reason to keep playing after you've reached the end. It's so simple. You're just like, oh, I win.
Thinking about it, it'd be really interesting if they like made, each game, but then like overall this would not work. This is just one of my crazy mad scientists, alternate timeline. Hopefully this exists somewhere. Like if they just start off with the original Spore, but then they release the sequel as the next stage, and every time they released a sequel, it was that next game that you could use from your previous evolution all the way into like the space game, which would then just end up being No Man's Sky.
But and like if that had actually come to fruition, it'd be so sick.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
That was like because like they went for that innovative. It was a huge scope, and they went for this huge innovative game design. Where like we want all these games in one game. You start off, with your single cell organism going around. I can't even compare to what kind of game that was. It's but yeah,
it was like an old arcade game, like a Worm. Kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just like Snake. It's
like
Snake. And then you go into, and then you're on land, and then you're kind of just like a really weird beat 'em up, just eating other things, or you can go the different route, and then now you have a management sim. Now you're playing an RTS with base
town
building,
builder,
and then you went into space. But it would have been neat because like you said, it lacked the depth in each one. None of those parts were really that great. The creature builder was really fun and neat, but the actual playing of the game was But it would have been neat if they just started off and then released this sequel, and they were like, hey, you can take your person you made, and now you can have them be a town. And then as a couple of years later, they focus on development and they're like, okay, now you can take your town, and you can take the people you've made, and you can put them into space. Yeah.
It suffered from the same thing. The one, I can never remember which Spider-Man movie it was, but I always remember it as the example because everyone panicked about it because it had like 6 villains in like an hour and a half movie. So every villain was like a 15-minute segment of the movie, and that's all they were there for. And it was just like a bunch of little shorts shoved together is what it ends up being because you don't have the time to focus or go into depth on anything. And yeah, it needed to be more games. Ballsy, though. Ballsy. And they spent a lot of money on it. Huge marketing, too.
Yeah. That game was also suffered from being overhyped. If you can scroll down a bit in the document, I'll have the I'll write down the examples. But one I want to bring up, since we're just talking about Valve, is Alex. It's a game in the Half-Life series, so they're putting the Half-Life name to risk. They're using that to, of course, give it some kind of credibility, saying that, hey, we're putting this on it, so it's going to be pretty good, but it's also not a sequel, and not 3, it's not 2, it's nothing in there, so they're not attaching it as a standalone. So they kind of reasonably played with people's expectations, which I thought, there's still a huge risk to putting the Half-Life name on that, because if it bombed, it didn't do good, it's a lot of damage to it. But I'm really glad that they're using that to be innovative in the VR space. And I think the budget for it, it's a private company, so they don't release it, but it's a really polished game. Like there's a lot of features into it, and it's probably, on the high end of a AA to AAA budget. I'm pretty sure they probably threw AAA resources at it, especially since, they have personal involvement with VR, with Steam VR, and of course the Index, but they didn't sell it at a AAA price, which, if you're going to your board or your investors and saying, hey, we want to make a game, but we want to sell it for cheaper than other games are, but still have a similar budget, like you're going to get laughed out of the room unless you have a solid plan in place, right? And that's going to come down to, market analysis. And they basically said no one's really doing AAA yet, but this is how we're going to get into AAA, is by, getting people's feet wet. No one, there's a bunch of games that are $80 that I kind of want to buy, but I don't want to take that risk as a consumer yet. Like for Canada, at least, they're like $80, $90 for us. They're $60 and $50 for you US folks. That's a lot of money for me to buy a game that might just be a tech demo, right? that standard hasn't been put into place. No one can really look at a game in VR and say this is AAA. A lot of them are kind of just arena shooters, which is they're fine and fun, but they're not a $80 or $90 or $60 experience compared to what you get on consoles yet. So it's really commendable for them to take the risk not releasing it for a full price, communicating that, hey, not really going to be a full Half-Life sequel. It's not a full AAA game, but you play it and it feels like, for me, it was the first time going, hey, this is what VR is going to be. This is AAA in VR. This is awesome. This is a lot of stuff going on. I'm really stoked for what they do. And still, unfortunately, it's short, a bit short, not a whole lot, of course, for what's going on. But with the price and stuff, it was kind of expected and good to see. But overall, a good risk, I'd say that they took for that.
Yeah, I agree. You got to be playing the long game.
Agree.
You got to be playing the long game with something like that. And the long game for them is absolutely, let's develop the VR market, because if we develop the VR market, we'll be first in the VR market. It's going to be hard to dethrone them after that. They can make a ton of money there.
Especially with a quality product like Alex. Like the criticisms that Pseudo levied are absolutely apt. Like it is a short game. It is something that is not what one would expect from a true AAA experience. But at the same time, it didn't sell for AAA money.
Yeah. Oh, it's the RE4 VR is only on Oculus?
Only specifically the new Oculus wireless headset, like the whatever it is 2, that's the only headset you can play it on.
So not even the other ones.
Dumb. That's a silly risk, making it HMD specific. Ew. We can add Final Fantasy 11. I talked about that earlier.
Yep. I'd also love to hear
that was a cool
some examples from chat too. So anyone in chat that wants to put out some examples of risks, we'll add them up to the list as well.
Ones you liked, ones you didn't like. One that Val is particularly close to, for instance, is the new God of War 4. They took a lot of risks. They changed Kratos' character significantly. They put him in an entire new context. They, tried to follow up what was one genre of game with a somewhat similar but still very different other genre of game. And took some risks with combat mechanics, some of which didn't pay off. But overall was a very successful game, and I'm super psyched to see what they do with the next one.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that they made such a Mario 64 going full 3D platforming. I don't know how I feel about that. Is it?
I would say that's a risk.
Yeah, that's a huge one on their part.
A necessary risk, though, as you go to the next gen. You can't keep it 2D at that point. Everything else is 3D.
But they didn't have to put their Mario IP on it, right?
That's true.
They didn't have to. Yeah.
You need to have a Mario game at launch, though. Every Nintendo console launches with the Mario game.
They still made 2D Mario games for N64 too, right? I think some of the RP Paper Mario there's still a Paper Mario, I think, for 64. But yeah, it was a risk to say we have 3D tech and we're going to put our main IP on it, because if it didn't do well, if it wasn't a good game, that would affect the Mario IP as well as almost tank the console.
Metroid Prime going FPS light. That's a sad one.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people love Prime. It's just not what one would expect from a Metroid game.
Prime has a strong cult following. And yeah, I mean, when you do something really, really different, the people that like it are going to like it because there's nothing else quite like it, right? That's the whole point of the risk, of the innovation.
You'll see that a lot with cemented genres and cemented studios, is that they'll take that risk, and there's always going to be varying degrees of fans that will get upset. There's going to be the purists that don't want any change and don't care if the games are going to sell, even if they're kind of niche in what they want. They still want what they want. There's people that, still have expectations what something is, and depending on how drastically it changed, well, they were all excited for the new, game coming out because they like the previous games. Well, now it's a completely different game, and the only thing that's the same as the name. Well, what's the point of, being excited? And then if it's still a good game and new people pick it up and people haven't played before, they can still like it and they'll still have a cult following for it. But it's one of those things where it's a risk to attach, your IP to something. It's also a risk to deviate away from your genre if you're a studio known for making like a certain style of game, and all of a sudden you want to try something new, going from like, an FPS game to a, let's say, third-person cover shooter, or going from like RPG, like open world RPGs, to a story single like level based shooter, first person shooter.
Yeah. What was, does anyone know the budget for Fallen Order?
I think they're public, so they'd have to release that.
I don't know, but I know it's not like full on AAA.
It's a pretty high polished game.
Yeah, but Respawn didn't have that kind of pull.
Yeah. But that was
I would say Fallen Order is probably like a AA level budget.
They got a damn near AAA level look and feel out of it. They did a great job.
Great.
Yeah. But yeah, that game, because that was, as we always comment on, that was their first attempt at anything like that. Yep. EA was the publisher for Fallen Order.
Respawn has always been EA. Ever since Titanfall 1, which was their first game, and I really liked it. Screw you guys.
It's okay to like bad games, Rage.
I've never played it.
Neither have I.
But like that's the thing though. It's actually not a bad game. It's just not your traditional approach to a first-person shooter. It was multiplayer only. And even the campaign was made of multiplayer matches, and it would go different ways depending on how the matches went. And it's a cool idea. They didn't implement it very well, but it was a cool idea. And the shooting mechanics were everything I loved from COD 4, and the tweaked Quake engine that they were using, and just cranked up to 11. Like, it was just brilliant game.
I think they used the proof of concept of the first game to get the budget to build the campaign for the second game, so the campaign could be done properly. Is probably how that played out, because that was their first crack, right? You can't go big. They scoped it properly and said, here, look what we can do. Now give us money to do it well. Right?
And they killed it. Like, you can occasionally get Titanfall 2 for like $4. Buy it. It's incredible.
It is pretty fun. I've played it a little bit. As not a very big FPS fan, I've had quite a bit of fun with it.
Very good game. Although I never got into the multiplayer for 2, actually. I found it just a little bit too ADHD. You have to be everywhere all the time.
You know what's funny? Like, I hear a lot of games that get described like that, and then as someone with ADHD, those games overwhelm the shit out of me. And it's like, it's true, because that's what happens, and what my life is like. But then, like, I try to play them the games, like, oh god, no, I try to get away from this.
You are not why I play games. Click.
Like, I wanted this, I would just walk outside and try and go get groceries. I have frustrated the hell out of people who try to shop with me, because I will go down an aisle 2 or 3 times because I don't always plan out what's going on. It's like, I get this. Oh, I want to get this. Oh, I gotta go back this. It's like, well, that other thing was in that aisle the first time. Like, I didn't think about it then though, so I gotta go back and get it.
I do the same thing.
It's all over the place. But in a game, if it's making me do that, I'm like, fuck, that thing is beside that. Just let me grab both now, please.
Turning more towards turn-based stuff in your old age. That's funny, because as I got older, I went from JRPGs to Souls-likes. The exact opposite. It's weird for me. I went from playing a lot of multiplayer games, and like a lot of multiplayer shooters, to just playing like single-player games. I used to play a lot of Battlefield style games and COD and stuff like that. And then I know as I got older, I don't know. I don't get the same feeling winning in competitive games anymore. I prefer like cooperative stuff now. So I mostly, if it's multiplayer, it's usually only co-op. Could we consider Final Fantasy Tactics a risk? I mean, it does qualify under the heavy genre shift out of nowhere, but it's also Golden Era Square, where literally everything they touch turned to gold. I would trust them to market a dog poop in a box in those days.
It would sell.
Oh, man.
Used to shit on battle royales quite a bit, but now that you've finally played some yourself, you've reconsidered your stance. Which one did you play?
The COD one, I believe, is what he was playing.
Nothing gets my heart racing or pumping like battle royales. Like, my God, it's intense.
Wars are interesting.
And then actually winning, like, it's one of those things where it's not even so much the game implementation, it's just the style of it. It's something new to people haven't really experienced too much yet. Like being in the last 10 or being in the final 5 or even just winning, like that winning can be so addicting to people because it's nuts. Like I've been playing them for a while back, and even when they're in mods, when they're just modded into onto the Arma games, and it's just that feeling of, okay, there's a lot of people, and it's kind of once you start getting to that 10, the game just shifts into next gear of just intense. Oh, like your heart's just racing. You don't know what's going to happen next. The thing's closing in, so you have to run, but you don't know if the person's in front of you or not. You're going to run for cover. You don't know if someone's there. Then someone starts shooting at you. You don't know where they're shooting at you from, so you're just freaking out. And all that stuff isn't game specific. That's across all the different games. They've just been putting it in every game, and unfortunately, that's why it's doing so well for every game, because that medium it's pretty fun and addictive. It's just kind of sucks that it also led to a lot of kind of predatory practices for loot crates and stuff like that, since the game itself is pretty simple and it's hard for them to charge a lot of AAA prices for a game that all it is you drop down into a thing and kill a bunch of people over and over again, and the way they keep it fresh is by loot crates.
Yeah, the loot crate part I could do without. I also don't really like the way the XP weekends and leveling up and everything get, like, people are suddenly just grinding, they're stealing MMO strategies here to just get you to play the game as long as possible, whether you're having fun or not. Just keep playing to keep unlocking things. Keep playing, time in hand. You don't have to, but you're incredibly driven to. Haven't played Apex, but I love how it's actually set in Titanfall's universe. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
interesting.
A lot of the weapons actually carry over between the games as well, except that they often ruin the weapons in Apex.
It wasn't a very big budget. It was just a small budget side project that they did because they have all these IPs kicking around and they can. I bet you there was even a lot of asset reuse in it. I bet you if you look into the budget of Air Guys, it was tiny. It was no Final Fantasy VIII development level, which is what AAA would be rising to in those days. The thing I don't like about the double XP is the fact that with new COD, you grind all those levels with double XP, and then each season you get reset anyway, so after all that, it's just a waste of time. Yep, that's the grind. They got to keep the grind going. If the grind ended, it wouldn't be the grind anymore.
The beautiful thing about it is that it's not really just double XP. That's just base XP at this point of how things are going. They just say it that way, so, it's double XP, so I need to play it because, I'm missing out on experience. So that's a shitty tactic, as well as the grind gives you a reason besides just dropping in and shooting people. Because like battle royals are fun, but without much of a purpose, dying number 50 or dying number 80, really kind of sucks, and it's hard to jump right back in. But now if you still get some points or still get something for it, then it's not a negative thing. It's like, I'm just grinding. I'm dying early, but at least I'm grinding. My time is going to something, and then they reset, and it turns out your time isn't really going to much. Like I said, those games are really fun for the last like 15 people. I find that's where like a lot of the really crux of that game is. If you never really got down to that, those games would get old for you very fast. But the way that they can keep 99 other people in there so that 15 people can have fun is by introducing these other mechanics into there.
At least if you die early or out quick, you can just go play another round.
Yeah, but now I think COD introduced the gulag as well. You can like have a chance to come back, duel someone, and have a chance, which is neat, which is a cool, like, interesting mechanic at least.
Good 10%. Good 10%. Yeah. These days, the grind is just a Skinner box to build the habit of playing the game. Play it every day, no need for fun, so you keep playing it and paying for DLCs or loot boxes. Yep, Exactly.
Ooh, Mortal Kombat's a good one.
I don't know if that was risky.
Yeah,
That was, I think not censoring it would have been the bigger risk because of all the money they had invested into building that family safe home image. The bloody market was never the market they were going after. They were protecting their market image when they did that. Genesis was always the console for the edgy teenagers. It was always the home of the blood.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's still a risk because of the fallback from fans, right? There were still a lot of teenage fans that were on SNES and stuff like that, right? And they use that to really they had to make a choice there. You know, are we going to really solidify our image as the young family friendly console, or do we want to still try to take some of that market share from Sega, because Sega was absolutely destroying them? And then I guess, the risk they took was, okay, we'll censor it, we'll take the backlash, that's fine, rather than taking the risk of keep it in, but now all of a sudden we've lost our family friendly image.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the viewpoint as well of they can just not buy that game. But in those days, especially in the infancy of the home consoles invading, and I think it was the safer choice to keep with their marketing image up to that point.
Yeah, it was a Wild West. I can't remember when the ESRB came in, because that was around the time of Night Trap. But I think they didn't want to have those games associated with their console, because it's a bad look, right? And at least, even if they don't have to buy the game, your images, your kids don't have the chance of even getting these kind of games, kind of thing, right? Which is probably good, because that was the image they've been going for a long time, and it works for them. They don't necessarily need to make violent games. Violent games don't actually need to exist. There's still a market out there for not to include that.
Yeah. Well, by the time Conker's Bad Fur Day was a game that they had matured a lot and allowed a lot more violence, because games had matured a lot. But as soon as saying, those early days, the infancy of it, even before the ESRB, there's a lot to be said for having a curated, safe selection of games for your kid. Because parents didn't grow up playing games. Games were brand new things. Most parents knew very, very, very little about games, had no idea what their kids were playing. So if you can just go and buy a game, or your kid wants a game for the system, and you don't have to do all this homework and look into it, because no parent's going to. A couple might, but most parents aren't going to look into what their kids are playing. You feel safe buying it and handing it to them. That's going to go a long way to selling your system to a lot of kids.
I know we only have a little bit of time left, but I'm wondering if we can squeeze in talking about some upcoming games that are taking some risks. Or if anyone in the chat has any examples of some upcoming games that are going to be taking some risks, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when they release.
Sure, you guys talk about that, and I will set up this.
Sure. Like Resident Evil 8 coming out pretty soon, following, close to the formula that 7 put out. So at least on the genre stepping front, they're sticking with we're going to go for that first person. But from what I remember, I think they're doing a bit more open world, and kind of, I can't remember the other stuff that was popping up, but it seems like they're going to try to maybe push further than a 10-15% difference from 7. But I'm thinking that it'll probably be pretty good.
Risky games that are coming out, huh? I don't even know. I have not been paying attention to new games.
Elden Ring?
Well, we don't know. We don't know if it even exists yet.
Well, they've told us that it's going to be an open world approach, and that each kingdom will be a different power.
So was Dark Souls 1. Like, this is not actually new. But the things that I'm really excited about is seeing game companies being more willing to take another risk on going back to 3D platformers. Like, we've seen a little bit of a resurgence in 3D platformers, and now we're seeing games like Kena Bridge of Souls coming out, which I'm actually really excited for, and games sort of in that vein, or more adventure, sort of 3D platformy, puzzly sort of things.
Oh yeah, Pokemon Snap's coming out end of the month.
Yeah, I'm buying the shit out of that.
I am not surprised.
I Oh, there's the Resident Evil multiplayer. No.
But why though?
Yeah, that's an interesting choice.
I'm sure it's not a big budget.
Whenever the new Elder Scrolls, they haven't released much, so we don't know how that is. But I'm sure that's going to be.
I'm sure it's going to be the exact formula of the last 6 of them.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Like, do they try to take that risk, or do they take a risk in keeping it the same formula and hoping that people aren't sick of it yet? Which chances are they aren't.
Okay, here's how that conversation goes. They come into the game designer's office and go, "Okay, we want you to design a new game," and he starts laughing at them.
Yeah, but I mean, they fumble on a lot of stupid shit too. I mean, they could just remake Fallout New Vegas and make a fuck ton of money by not changing anything and just making it, a AAA experience, a modern day AAA experience. Like, look at the hype just the mods get, like the stuff that's free, not even the stuff if they were just, take it through, update the assets and re-release it in Fallout 4's engine. Like they could do that, but they don't, because it's still risk, I guess.
Yep. Well, like you said, like we've talked about at the beginning, if we want to break it down, every single game is a risk, period, because it's an investment without knowing.
Deathloop's going to be an interesting one, yeah, that Val brought up, because it's going to be interesting. Very, yeah, with the AI controlled, or I think it's also multiplayer, they can, I think, hunt you down, and just the concept of like looping games and time loop games aren't always, too.
Okay, so
sorry.
And I'm the asshole here. I'm the one who's interrupting. But can somebody please explain to me why Arcane's games are good? Because I do not understand. I don't get them.
Whose?
Arcane.
Oh.
The people who did Dishonored. They're doing Deathloop. What else did they do?
I can't help you on that one.
It's like I said, it's maybe one of those like bigger niche things that people don't always realize, or it's just, I don't know, people like games that have a lot of freedom of choice and they feel like they have a lot of power in how they want to do things, and then they're not challenging enough that they're a casual experience for if someone messes up. They don't force you to do the stealthy way. You can kind of just do that. It's kind of similar thing to like the Hitman series. A lot of them before, they're not really that challenging. It promotes, you're supposed to do things sneaky, and the game is promoted as being fun because you get to play as this, super awesome Hitman, but then it just turns out to become just a shooter because you piss off one person getting caught, and then next thing you know, you have to kill the entire map. I think it's just a market that people just like. I don't know if they would go to say they're good or the full sign, but I mean, good doesn't always mean it'll sell. But Deathloop is going to be interesting. Very interesting concept, because it's taking that kind of formula but now putting a time loop into it where, depending on how it's designed, doing the same thing over and over again can be really, really shitty. So I'm hoping it's not one of those games where it's like, if they try to make it like a roguelike where you have to do everything in this certain order and you're just going to keep doing it until eventually you're good enough to do it, that's going to be ass, because
yes.
You're at that point you're basically just trying to speed run, and there's a speed running is something that can be very fun, but it's definitely not something for everyone. So it's going to be interesting to how they do that. Do they change where you spawn? Can you kill someone and then reset the loop to do something else? But it does seem like, from what they've put out there, that you need to kill everyone and then the last person to win. And I don't really see how they're going to change that up if it's supposed to be a loop, because it's going to have to stay the same. So it's going to be like, you figure out how to kill the first 4 people, and then you just keep doing that to get to the 5th person, but the 5th person keeps killing you until you figure it out? Or do you just like kill one person, you figure it out, kill the 2nd person, you figure it out, kill the 3rd person, do it all the way out to the end, and then once you figure them all out, you just try to chain them together? Like, it's going to be like interesting. I'm not sure I'm going to say it's going to be good. I'm looking forward just to seeing something new kind of brought up and played out with, even if it does fail. But yeah, they're definitely taking a risk with this approach.
Yeah, I like Val brings up a good point that people like their world building. They are pretty good at that, but I don't get it.
World building does sell games. Look at Witcher.
I don't get those games.
Witcher series is all world building. That's why it sells. It sure as hell ain't gameplay, I guarantee you.
And incredible character writing.
Yeah, character writing, gameplay. those things do sell games. It doesn't have to be the best technical game. We're definitely in the minority of that. Just like music. Most people buy music by pop music. That's why it's pop. It's popular. It's simple. It's easy to consume. Not everybody likes musicians' music. It can be hard to understand. It can give them a headache trying to follow all those notes and what the hell is going on. But it's maybe a more educated form of it. More appreciation towards the art form of it rather than just the mass consumption of it.
Punk brings up a good point. Don't forget digital waifus. On a note, just because we're talking about games that are coming out, does anybody know if Proteus has an actual release date yet? Because I want Proteus. Like Steam lists the 9th of November 2020, but that was their early access release date.
No idea. Now it's too quiet.
There's I forgot they're back for Blood, the spiritual Left 4 Dead successor. That's one of those ones where it's like you're not taking too much of a risk because everyone wants a Left 4 Dead 3, but what the risk comes in is the implementation of, are you going to be able to pull it off? Are you going to be able to live up to any of those expectations? At least with them not having the name, it's a little bit easier, but still people are going to be wanting Left 4 Dead 3, and you still need to make a new game because you can't just copy theirs, but you also need to keep it still close enough to that one so that people don't get they don't feel like they're cheated or upset from it being I guess them being lied to.
Nobody likes to be lied to.
Oh, one thing we forgot that would have been a good idea is Doom Eternal. I think their combat system, the changes in that was a pretty big risk.
Yeah, it almost alienated me, and then I figured out Chainsaw, and then I was like, oh my god, this is the best game ever made.
And then those poor console players, I'm so sorry, Val, like my god.
I don't know how you beat that game.
Pookie beat
no
it.
concept of this.
Holy shit.
Pookie beat it on console.
It's just it's just like the experience, just like the way it translates to like controller. I just feel like I don't have enough buttons, and it doesn't. It's one of those weird things. It's usually it goes console first and then PC, but it does seem like PC is just the optimal way to play it because you need to look around a lot, especially if you're going from like a monkey barm to monkey barm. It's like, yeah, but once it grows on you, it's like it gets addicting. I still feel like, man, I want to play it. I get that thing. It's just so much fun. I
can play it again. Play it again on Nightmare. It's the perfect difficulty level. Like it's just enough that it's still challenging, but you still feel like the Doom Slayer. Like you don't feel like you have to run from them. You feel like they have to run from you.
Yeah. Doom 3 was, that was risky. And they just made Doom 3 VR for PlayStation like a couple weeks ago for whatever reason, because that's what needed to exist. We're getting to the point now where I don't think anyone cemented a VR AAA title. So now what we're doing is translating existing AAA titles into VR through porting studios because it's cheaper to do, and then hoping that it still makes money because it's attached to that name.
I'm okay with this for now.
How is Alex not what? Oh yeah, we talked about Alex was definitely a risk. And it was like I think like probably the closest to AAA I'd see, but it's just short, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's just not quite AAA is the thing.
Yeah, I'd say it's AAA for VR. It's the most AAA I'd say. It's definitely Valve testing the waters. They can put this out. I'm assuming it actually sold pretty well and did favorably, which means now they can go back and say, hey, we can get a lot more budget and make a lot more game, and then release. I would not be surprised if in a couple of years we see this like massive title drop from them for VR, especially now that they're, I think, still working on a new version of the Index and really committing to VR. Yeah, it's going to take, I don't think any studio really wants to take on that risk yet of trying to lead the way into VR, because like why would you? It's so new. There's so many issues you have to solve out, and there's so many problems. Even like small indie studios haven't figured out a lot of stuff too. Like we don't even have movement. We don't have locomotion properly yet. Like some people teleport, some people you swing your arms, some people you just push forward like a like the joystick just to kind of slide around, and unfortunately some people get sick, some people get that. So we may also just be waiting for like hardware advances. Maybe we'll find a way that we can get walking movement without actually moving anywhere, and that'll really add the immersion. Or maybe we'll find a way to do seated games a lot better. Well, it's still such a gray area that no one wants to put $50 million into it, especially when only like less than 10% of the market actually has the hardware to buy your game and play it. So we're also waiting for prices to come down, so there's more of a market there to support the budget.
Yeah, and I still don't have VR hardware. I could afford to buy VR hardware. I don't, because it's not at a quality level where I'm okay spending the money on it. Like, we don't have full inside out tracking. We don't have wireless. We don't have a high refresh rate, all in the same package. That product doesn't exist. And that's what I need to get into VR.
And also for it not to cost like $2,000, $1,500.
Honestly, if it does all of those things, I would consider it at $2,000.
Yeah, but if it was at the price at least of a console. But another thing we typically overlook for VR too is that most people also need to have a gaming PC. So like to be able to get into that, at least nowadays most graphics cards can power it not too bad. But I remember when I first got my Vive, I had a 680, and it ran it not well, but it still ran it. But like just to show like how much of a leap it had to go, and then I ended up getting a 1080 Ti because I'm like, I don't want to mess with this. I thought VR was the coolest thing, and I convinced myself like, oh, I'll make VR games, and then it's been busy. I'm hoping to still one someday. Turns out it's very hard. I tried it a bit. It's very hard, even with engines. It still takes a lot. I should go back to it because it's probably a lot easier now because there's been a lot of other people to do it.
I'm sure the tooling has come a long way since then.
Yeah, but back then it was like, yeah, the Steam VR and Unity crashed a lot. I'm like, ooh, or like one controller would show up and then you'd have to spend 2 hours debugging while your other controller isn't registering in the game, and they're like, oh. But yeah, you need, or at least nowadays you don't need as beefy as a computer to run it. But back then it was that cost plus the thing cost over $1,000, so it was very, very limited market adoption. I'm surprised. Like, I'd really like to see games take on the seated approach. I think VR kind of fell into a bit of a rut with everyone trying to do full motion, and I still think there's a huge market for seated, like racing titles and like even Squadrons is like Squadrons. I wouldn't play it if it wasn't for the VR. Like the VR for Squadrons makes that so much fun. It's so cool, especially with like a joystick that I have. It's really cool. It makes me feel like I'm in like an arcade. There's a lot of arcade experiences that you can get without having to sell the arcade peripherals too. You can still use existing controllers, or even still use like keyboard and mouse is hard because with a keyboard, if you're wearing a headset, you can't really see what's going on. But there's still a lot of other interactive media that you can do with it, or you can implement other ways into it. Or make it multiplayer, right? Like you can have a game where someone's in the headset and other people, aren't, and then you don't have to put that burden of full control on the headset. You can utilize that to your advantage. Maybe you can even, very random idea, but you can make something that's kind of like the Eye of Sauron, where one player is just that in a tower looking around trying to find everyone else who's doing hide and seek, trying to sneak up to the tower, and if you get caught by them, you lose.
That actually sounds pretty fun. The Eye of Sauron being the VR and everyone else having controllers and trying to sneak through the buildings and everything to get up there.
Yeah, and then the moment you look away, you try and move up, and you're trying to fake each other out and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty fun. So apparently we had no problem filling 2 hours with AAA risks. That was a pretty fun topic, it turns out.
That was a good chat.
Yeah.
Little bit of divergence from the chosen topic, but it was a good chat.
In the worlds of us, we had like very, very, very little sidetracking. Almost everything was on topic today.
I don't think we talked about Souls much, which is surprising because I'd say that Sekiro was probably a bit of a risk on their end. But my God.
Well, you had to ruin it.
I'm sorry. It's at the end at least, but it wasn't a mid interruption. I was saying, but we're past the 6 o'clock. This is the wilderness in stream time. So it's anybody's game now. But yeah, I'm surprised we didn't get a 10 to 15 to 20 minute sidetrack on that, which usually happens. We were pretty on topic.
I mean, the reason we didn't mention Dark Souls in this is because none of their games rose to the level of being truly AAA. There was a lot of AA innovation there. And by the time they were AAA, there was no innovation left. Bloodborne,
Yeah.
Dark Souls 3, there's no innovation there. They're just refining their product. That's all it is.
And then you see that example of now everyone's trying to take those features that they've came and try to put them into their AAA games, and they're not doing it so well, at least for the most part. But yeah, it's interesting to see at least that kind of ecosystem of indie to AA pushing forward design innovation, and then that getting adopted further up to the AAAs who are pushing for the technology innovation.
All right, so we should wrap this up, but I've done the giveaway, and people chatted through it, but Egg 2-Leg, Ilarox, Rubido Carito, House Kid 1, I saw you in chat, you got a game, and Art of Fighting, who I see pop in fairly often. We will find you all, hopefully. I know 3 of you, I think 4 of them are in the Discord, so I will hit them there. Ilarox is the only one I'm concerned on. If anyone knows Ilarox, let them know. The rest of you expect to be contacted tomorrow and have a game key dumped in your lap. I hope you all enjoy. I hope you've all enjoyed the chat. I will definitely be back later for some kind of gaming. I promise. Something will get played.
I will make no such promise.
I didn't think so. But something will be.
My homework that was supposed to be due tonight got delayed to Monday, so I might actually have free time to play games.
Oh, well then maybe Pseudo and I will play some State of Decay too. And I'll check that out.
Sick.
All right. Yep. That might happen. And Rage, you can jump in and join us. If you have Xbox Game Pass, it's free.
I don't.
Okay. Well.
There's always a chance of rain and a chance of dwarves.
Oh yeah. If you do show up, I was going to say I'd love to percentage of precipitation and maybe get some more unlocks, or even Diggy Dwarves, because we haven't Diggy Dwarved in a while. We'll see who else is here at that time. But until that time, I'm Deus.
I'm Rage.
And I'm Pseudo.
And may all your shots be headshots.